Hey game fans, welcome back. I'm Kristen, and today we are going to talk with Ian from Jaggy Snake Games about their game Questing. Now, Questing is actually now available as a demo at the time of the interview. It wasn't quite out yet, so definitely make sure that you go and snag that on Steam. If you're curious about Jaggy Snake, definitely make sure that you go follow them on all the social media accounts, but definitely make sure that you wishlist Questing on Steam. This is probably the number one thing that you can do for a developer before a game releases. Otherwise, if you like these videos and these chats that we have with developers, make sure you like and subscribe. This really helps the channel to continue growing and to continue having these interviews in the future. Without further ado, let's do. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Kristen. Today I'm here with Ian from Jaggy Snake Games, and we are going to be talking about their game Questing. And I'm super excited to hear about this title. Can you tell us a little bit about you, about your game, and how you came to be building this thing almost by yourself entirely?
Sure. My background is more so as a writer in film and TV because I thought that's what I wanted to do. But somewhere along the way, I kind of pivoted to video games, which was my first love. So I've kind of been in the games industry since 2018, give or take. And somewhere along the way, I kind of started working on my own little prototypes and demos and little games that I'd make in engines, almost just as like a learning exercise. And one of the little prototypes I made turned into Questing because I realized there was potential here to make something real out of it. So since then, that's kind of been one of my main focuses alongside of my actual day jobs in the game industry.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think it must be, it must be that each role sort of influences the other. From your day job, you might learn some skills that get applied into this title and vice versa. Have you noticed that happens, that there's maybe an overlap between these two kind of simultaneous game things that you're building at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've been lucky enough so that I've worked on all kinds of projects over the years, like AAA, mobile stuff, small indies, and I've worked on I've worked on games where story was like front and center, and I've worked on games where story was something that the audience might be more inclined to skip over to get to the gameplay, if that makes sense, which as a narrative designer / writer, which is my background, it's an interesting challenge to figure out how you find ways to make the story interesting for people who just instinctively want to skip to it and get to the action and get to the gameplay. So I've learned a lot about narrative design just from working on the games where story isn't the focus, which has been super interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can imagine that would be a bit of a struggle, because as you're saying this, I'm starting to reflect on some of the games that I've played where I kind of skip the story, or I've played it so many times that now I just know the story, so I sort of skip through these dialogues and try to get to the meat, usually the combat. That's what I tend to like in the games. And yeah, so I can imagine trying to balance those things might be challenging. And I would imagine both in your day work and building Questing that you're probably repeatedly kind of coming back to this same thing over and over again. And something that really stood out to me on your Steam page, you were talking about the protagonist in your game was sort of not a person who doesn't really want to be a hero. They were chosen without this desire, which I think a lot of us get put into these situations occasionally in our lives where we get to choose, are we going to be heroic or ignore whatever situation's happening? So I was curious if you could share a little bit about the protagonist and how we might be kind of subverting this classical hero trope in Questing.
Sure. So, yeah, no, the protagonist in questing, it's kind of like, you know how in a lot of adventure RPG games, the main character can often be like this blank slate or this silent protagonist that the player kind of projects themselves on or molds their personality a little bit based on how the player wants to play the game. It's very rare for an RPG protagonist to have this like super well-defined personality. And I've always thought that's quite funny, this idea that this character could exist in this universe but doesn't seem to have any kind of personality or autonomy before the player starts playing the game. So we kind of play with that a lot, where the protagonist in questing is just this ultimate blank slate, silent protagonist, absolute nobody, who is trying to get home to his parents' house to do his laundry because his washing machine is broke down. And that's all he cares about. And he just kind of, I guess, fails upwards while trying to avoid conflict. He accidentally defeats evil in increasingly ridiculous ways. And the other thing is that along the way, he ends up meeting all of these NPCs and side characters who are like, I'm the chosen one, you know, an I'm Spartacus kind of moment. And you gradually watch them fail while your nobody blank slate protagonist continues to succeed. So it's just kind of a fun little story element that turns the entire kind of RPG chosen one trope on its head, I guess.
Oh, it's that's so cool to hear, because I think that it touches on this element that I don't see a lot in games. Because don't get me wrong, I love playing games for that heroic instinct. I recently was chatting with somebody who had quoted Brendan Lee Mulligan, where he says that everybody has a heroic instinct. And I think that games, especially, you know, typically RPG games, really touch on this heroic instinct. They give us a place to put that. There's a place to express this desire to help other people that I'm glad to hear most people have. But I think there's room to have experiences like there is in questing, where most of the time the things that we are trying to accomplish is literally just by need, right? Me going to the grocery store ends up becoming a quest because everything goes wrong on the way there. And so I like that this is like a very human experience that I don't think we get to experience a lot in games. So I'm really excited to see how that plays out. Since it is an RPG, do the players' decisions affect how the story develops and turns out toward the end?
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone who's kind of gotten sick of games that present choices with no real consequences. I mean, as much as I love games by Telltale, for example, The Walking Dead and all of that stuff, I love the writing and storytelling in those. No matter how many choices you make along the way, it always feels like they're kind of funneling you into one specific route or ending. So we tried to do something slightly different with questing, where instead of just presenting a choice where you choose yes or no and then you go on the branch that you choose, there's kind of a morality system that changes your alignment over the course of the game based on choices you make. So you don't choose the left or the right path, you choose the actions you want to do, and the game kind of takes note of them and is kind of preparing to judge you for them at the end. A little bit like Undertale, which has its judgment scene at the end. I've always thought that just felt like a more, I guess, practical way to provide branches and different endings based on the character's choices, instead of just like pushing them down a specific road based on choices.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because I feel like it lends itself to consequence, which I think, again, is more of kind of a realistic experience. And not that every game has to be like that, but that is something that I really like. Like, I swear to God, I bring up Baldur's Gate like every day of my life, so I apologize. But I do think that is like probably one of the more famous examples of even tiny decisions that you make in that game. At the end, you start to see how those choices have really impacted, you know, both the future for you, for people in your party. And I really enjoyed that about the story. And that's something that I think will be really exciting about questing, is like, do you decide to be good? You know, how do you make these choices and face these sort of moral quandaries with people that you interact with? And I like things like this that make you also a little bit kind of self-reflect, like, what would I do in this situation? I think it reveals a lot about us as well. You know, we do things in games we would probably not do in real life.
That's genuinely a lot of why I wanted to have such a blank slate protagonist is that eventually the game kind of confronts you with this, like, we have this, like, weird cognitive dissonance when it comes to games where it's like, we'll play The Legend of Zelda and we want to be a hero and we want to save the world, but we'll also go into a random NPC's house and smash up their pots and attack their chickens and all of this ridiculous stuff that we would never get away with in the real world. And it's the same with something like Red Dead Redemption, where it's like, we want to be this, like, cool, badass anti-hero, but we'll also do the most awful stuff to the random NPCs around us. We'll mess up the world, we'll cause chaos, we'll just be like a bull in a china shop just because it's a consequence-free environment. You know, it's basically a playground for us. And then once we've gotten all that out of our system, we go back to being the hero. So questing kind of touches on that a little bit as well, this weird kind of conflict, kind of like the ego versus the id kind of situation, the desire to be the hero versus our weird animalistic instincts to just cause random chaos because we can.
Yeah, that's so true. I love going into random buildings and games and just messing with stuff or seeing what you can steal. You know, I don't think I've stolen anything since I was like 15 years old, you know, but I still go into, like in Fallout, I know that there's karma. I know there's karmic revenge. I'm still going to take stuff just because it's fun, you know, and like you try your little sneak skill and see if you can get into places. And I think that that's, you know, that's something that's so incredible about just gaming in general, and I think gamers we tend to love is just this ability to, I don't think I've ever said the F word on this channel, but I can't think of a better way to say it, just like fuck around, you know, just like stumble around, mess with stuff, grab stuff, throw things around. And I love that games give us this outlet because it's so much better to do that in a game space than to go mess with somebody in the real world. And so I think questing is going to be really fun because it lends sort of an outlet to that, a little bit of, you know, it sounds like there's a little bit of satire, a little bit of humor surrounding it, and I like that we can kind of dig into how would we go about handling this problem. Like it made me think as I was watching this, it's like, what would I do if my washing machine broke? There is a laundromat nearby. I don't want to go in there. It's scary.
But it's also kind of the situation of, what would I do if I'm having this standoff with this legitimately evil person? In our head, we're like, I know exactly how I would deal with that. I would charge at them and be the hero and save the day. And we all know that's not the case for most of us. But questing also kind of does that as well, because you're this nobody who just accidentally keeps wandering into these situations where you have to confront these evil people. And it's like, you're not the right person to be doing this. You're this average person. Stop trying to save the world, you know?
Yeah, that's so true. I love that because I love how unique of a take that is, because I have previously complained about too much prestige in a game. Like when everybody at a certain point, like, don't get me wrong, I love Skyrim, one of my favorite games of all time. However, that game at a certain point, everyone in the game knows who you are. Everybody's constantly like, oh, Dragonborn. And like, it's kind of fun or whatever, but at the same time, like, I don't know, I'm a little bit shy about that kind of stuff. And so even playing a game, it like makes me feel kind of weird. So I love that there's this opportunity to play a character that's like, I just did it because I was there. I had to handle the situation. And so I love that they're not seeking out like these kinds of things, and it doesn't sound like there's any kind of I don't know how to describe it, like God hand that's like trying to guide them through, you know, their quest, and they're just trying to get to a super like normal event done in their life. And I noticed that you described one of the battle systems. You described this as Pong meets bullet hell.
Yes.
So I was curious if you might be able to elaborate on this because it sounds pretty awesome.
Sure. I mean, like a lot of things about this game, it was kind of influenced by Zelda, A Link to the Past specifically, and Ocarina of Time. Because in the battles with Ganondorf that you have right at the end of the games, he'll shoot this like energy blast at you, and Link, you playing as Link, will have to knock it back with your sword, and it creates this little tennis match. And I thought, that's such a cool mechanic, and it's only used for like 5 minutes in these games. So I was like, how can we build an entire battle system around this? And I realized just having the tennis matches, the back and forth, is quite thin on its own. So I started adding these other elements where at one point an enemy will fire an attack that you knock back. Other times they'll fire an attack that you can't knock back, that you'll have to dodge. And as the battles kind of evolve, both of these things happen at the same time, where you'll be like, dodge, attack, dodge, attack. And it almost becomes like a rhythm game where you're trying to remember patterns in order to do damage to the enemy. We also have like, the thing is, the potential for adding elements to this, and like even adding elements of other genres to this little battle system, is like, it was so huge. And I didn't even realize how much potential it had until like years into development. So it became something that we really got excited about in all the different ways we can use it. And we ended up with so many weird boss battles where there's like rhythm games influencing it, and tower defense games influencing it, and puzzle games influencing it, as you have to like figure out how to defeat the boss while still using your timing and your reflexes to survive. So I hope it lives up to its potential.
I hope so too, yeah. It sounds like it's going to be a really fun experience, because something that I've really loved about this sort of platformer style of game is that you can sort of play with the physics in the space. I think for a long time, at least my impression was that we had sort of reached the end of what was possible to do in that kind of space. It's often, swinging your sword in one direction and just hoping that, the tip hits them. But I think in the last, couple of years, we've seen that there are things beyond what we thought was the limit in that kind of battle. And I think that there's going to be a really cool opportunity to try to sort of memorize what kind of movements you need, what kind of, like you said, rhythm that you need to dodge. That's when I first started playing games. I don't know why, I just didn't understand that. I understood the concept of get out of the way, but it was really hard for me to try to figure out exactly how I wanted to time attacks, what their weakness was. And I remember my first victory was in N64. What's that? Donkey? Oh, it's just Donkey Kong 64. Yeah, in DK64, there's the armadillo, and he would roll around on his back, and then he would stop and he would shoot, I think it was fireballs at you, and then he would stop and go, ha, ha. And it took me ages to figure out that that's when I needed to shoot him. And when I finally figured this out, I was like, oh my god. And I've, of course, always played games since then. I've just always been hooked to that feeling of like, oh, I did it. I figured out the solution. Yeah. So I like that the storyline and it sounds like the gameplay sort of marry each other into this, like, well, I guess I'm just dealing with this now. So, okay, now I'm in a situation, so I'm going to dodge, I'm going to parry, I'm going to weave, I'm going to do what I need to do to get out of the way.
And that's the thing, is that the main character never actually attacks anyone, because he's not a warrior, he's not a hero, he's not a fighter. He just stands there and tries to knock other people's attacks out of the way and survive. He's not Link who's gonna run in there with his sword. He's just gonna stand there, and if someone tries to attack him, he's just gonna try and defend himself the best he can.
That's awesome. That's really cool. It's like, it feels like me living my daily life. I was recently watching some of these videos. I think we've decided to call them Karens and Kevins. I think that's what we culturally decided to call very angry people in public. I was watching these videos. I don't know why. I have no idea why these were on my phone. And I remember watching, I think it was like a teenage girl. She's the one filming, so I couldn't see her face. But she was yelling back at these people, like trying to get them to leave like a service worker alone at some fast food place. I have no idea where it was. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't think I would confront this person, even though I know what they're doing is wrong. Like, we don't like to scream at service employees. I've been that guy that's been screamed at by, people in public. But as I was looking at some of the stuff for this game, I kept thinking to myself, like, I don't know what I would do in these kinds of situations. And I would love to think that I would be very, like you said, be very brave and run in there like Link and just, slash and dash and, run off and be like, yeah, but the reality is there's no way. There's no way. I might film it and post it online and be like, look, what a crazy person. Or I should say like that, but like, look, what a wild experience. But it's, yeah, so I'm really excited to see that that's even an element of the gameplay. He's even more of like sort of a passive participant in confrontation.
And we do kind of, I guess we kind of, not in a harsh way, but we do kind of call out gamers a little bit on their bravado, I guess. Because, you'll see someone post on social media where they're like, oh, if I was in this horror movie, the problem would be dealt with immediately. I would just confront the bad guy. But then in their day-to-day life, there'll be the people who have anxiety that stops them from doing really simple things. And I always find this acknowledgement of the social anxiety we all have, but in our heads, we're like, yeah, in this situation, I'd be the biggest hero. It'd be like John McClane in Die Hard, where I'd solve everything. So I always find that kind of, it's like everyone has this little hint of like fantasy world in their head, and games often kind of, I guess, I don't know if exploit is the right word, but they kind of use that to tell their stories. And I always find that so funny that the moment we put ourselves in a hero fantasy situation, all semblance of self-awareness is gone. So yeah, we kind of make fun of that a little bit in the game.
I like that a lot. I think self-reflection is good, and I like when games give us an opportunity to, in a safe environment with zero judgment, approach some kinds of internal relationship that we have with ourselves and that we have with games. I think we're entering a period with gaming in general where I think games and gamers are becoming kind of self-aware. Like I studied art history, and it was interesting to look through art history to see when painting became aware of itself, because painting changed a lot really fast. When it went from, a lot of people, I promise this is related. It went from like a lot of people who, basically paid, they were these patrons for these people painting images that had a lot of hidden meanings in them. They were essentially an item, a product that very, very wealthy people owned as sort of a flex, honestly, that they could hire somebody to paint this piece. But when painting stopped being that stopped being this sort of limited scope, there were only a few people who knew how to do it. When there was a more egalitarian approach and access to painting, then suddenly painting became very aware of itself in the world. And I think we might be seeing that sort of same thing happening in games, where for a long time only AA and AAA studios really were the only people that were able to make games. It was prohibitively expensive, it was prohibitively complicated, but with the tools that we have, with the more ease of access we have to technology, pretty much anybody with a lot of dedication and creativity can put a game together. And so I think gaming is becoming aware of gaming. It's almost like, of course, people have always been sort of meta aware of it, but for the game player, for people who actually don't have any idea what goes on behind the screen, but are very involved in trying to, live these stories, I think for players, we're becoming like significantly more aware of what our role is as the player and what maybe game makers are trying to do in the stories that they're telling. And I think questing is like really sitting right at the precipice of this conversation of like, we are starting to see behind the curtain a little bit and being forced to reflect on what that means for us as players through a really fun, very satirical kind of experience.
The thing is, like, sorry to interrupt, for me as a writer, the stories that I don't have any interest in games are the stories that just feel like they're movie scripts or TV scripts that got kind of sliced up and placed between gameplay segments. If you look at something like, The Last of Us, which on a technical level is a fantastic game and is a fantastically written game, but they adapted it to a TV show so easily because it just feels like a story as good as it is that could exist in any medium. And so I am always so much more interested in like stories that could only be told through video games, through their satire, through the interactivity that the player has with them, through the fourth wall breaking, whatever it may be. And that's what I've always wanted to do. And that's kind of how questing came about, as this like opportunity to create a story that has a certain amount of interaction with the player that kind of makes the player go, oh yeah, actually the hero fantasies we try to follow are really weird and silly and make no sense, and yet we fall for them every time.
Yeah, that's so true. Like, I think that's a really good point. Because I think we like to live in fantasy. I think that's a huge part of wanting to play games. I think that's a very shared experience with gamers. But I love this opportunity to be like looking right at the camera, making ourselves kind of painfully aware of the experience that we're having. And I see a lot of conversations conversations online through, Discord and Reddit and all of the, the 9,000 social media presences that are alive now. There's a lot of conversation around what we expect from the stories that we're playing and what we expect from the characters in those stories. And so I think there's going to be some conversations when this comes out, which is going to be really exciting to see how people sort of interact and respond. Because maybe there's some people that were not expecting it and go in and we're like, what the hell is this? You know what I mean? But I think for somebody like me that really loves just kind of, one of the guys I interviewed used this quote, these goofy little experiences, and I always come back to that. I'm like, I just love these goofy little experiences that, like, I think that's the fun of games. So I'm super excited to see how it progresses. And have you had a chance to do any kind of like play testing, whether it's with like friends or people in your community?
Yeah, actually, over the last 2 weeks, we've done quite a bit of it because I was lucky enough to attend Gamescom Canada in Edmonton, where, I mean, it's just a general kind of convention with tabletop stuff, gaming, like video game stuff, all kinds of like nerd culturally things just all together. So I got a lot of people who are just like average, normal gamers, not part of the industry, just a fan of games, just getting the chance to play my game. And the feedback was so invaluable. I learned that my game is significantly more difficult than I realized it was. Because when you're like the person making it and you know how everything works, you can breeze through your own game pretty easily. But when you put the controller in the hand of someone who has no idea what's going on and is starting from like square one, you see how the progression mechanics work a little bit better. Turns out our game is quite difficult. Which I had no idea about. But I was really happy with a lot of the feedback we got because it was so positive, and especially towards like the writing, which meant a lot to me because that's my background is as a writer. So, once we, I guess, tweak the difficulty a little bit, I think the demo will be in a place that we're really happy with. But just having normal people pick up the game and play it has been incredible because, when you're making it, you can't see the forest for the trees. So that was a really cool experience. And, some friends and family have played it as well and given their really, really valuable feedback. So I would say we probably waited a bit too late before playtesting because we're less than 2 weeks away from the demo dropping. But we're really happy with the feedback we got. And also, we're really happy that people seem to be enjoying it despite its difficulty.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, I think by the time that this goes out on YouTube, I'm pretty sure that the demo will be out by then. I'm 90% positive. So for people watching this, definitely go check out the demo. I will definitely give it a playthrough. I admittedly am not that great at rhythm stuff, but I do try. So I'll see how I can do on that. Because I can imagine that seeing somebody wander through a world that you've created would be both humbling and terrifying in a way. It's almost like your secret gets seen. So it's like extra eyes on something that you've held pretty close to your chest. And it seems like you've been working on questing for a while. When did you start this project?
2018, nice. I think that's correct. The pandemic just kind of warped everyone's sense of time, so years just kind of blurred together a bit. But I think it was 2018 where I started it just as a little project on my own because I had just joined the games industry and I kind of took it as an obligation of mine to learn how engines work and learn a bit about programming, just learn about how games worked in general. Even though I was coming in as a writer and I didn't need to know that stuff, it was like it helps to kind of understand a little bit of each discipline when you're joining the industry and you're working on these kinds of projects. So I started it in 2018 and then I tinkered with it here and there for a few years. And then I'd say in 2023 is when I decided, like, I'm actually going to make this. I'm going to properly make this because at that point in my career, I had gotten quite disillusioned with the games industry, or at least the AAA games industry, because I'd been working for CD Projekt Red at the time, which I had told myself was like my dream job, but then you get there and it doesn't quite work out the way you'd hoped. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make my own thing. And it's going to be awesome. So from 2023 onwards, questing, I don't want to say it became my only focus, but it became one of my main priorities. And it just became 2 years straight of making enough so that we could release a demo, fine tuning everything, and then eventually this year playtesting, QA, polishing, so that we can get something out in June. It was supposed to initially be out in time for Next Fest, and then I found a bug. It was the tiniest bug, but it gave me such a crisis in confidence that I was like, nope, I can't put this out. We're gonna skip Next Fest. We're gonna wait till the end of the month until we fix this bug, or else we're ruined. That's it. That's the end of my career. Because I tend to be a little bit overdramatic about stuff I care about. But yeah, so now we're slated for the demo to release on the 30th of June, fingers crossed.
Oh my god, that's awesome. Oh my gosh, it's soon. That's really, really exciting. At the time of recording, it is June 18th. So I just to give listeners a bit of a timeline on where we're at here. So yeah, we've got like what, 2 weeks? I believe in you. It's gonna happen. I know like demos are such a pain because it's almost like a mini version. So I was talking to a friend who does all the code, and he's building a demo for this other title. And he was talking about how you have to like snip all these trees, essentially, like things that are, related to stuff later on, but you have to somehow kind of cut it off and parse it so that just this one little piece works. So he's like, it's almost like building a second game. Like,
yes, exactly.
But, oh gosh, so I can imagine that it's, quite cumbersome. I'm sure people are going to be really excited to play it, and I'll have to practice my my dodge and weave skills and see if I can survive.
Just play a lot of Pong and you'll get the hang of it.
Hey, that's not a bad idea. It's probably free online somewhere. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, and I guess with Chrono Trigger being an inspiration, it kind of makes sense. They'd have to be like
right, exactly.
Awesome. Yeah, I really love how very humorous this game is, and it combines a lot of some of my favorite elements, looking around, stumbling on stuff, having these weird interactions with characters and environments. What first kind of led you into wanting to write something that's a little bit more in like a humorous kind of satirical direction?
Honestly, I found that a lot of fantasy games and RPG games, over the years, they kind of started taking themselves a little too seriously, in my opinion.
Oh.
Some people might disagree with that, but I've always found that they lack a sense of irony or humor. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to make something that's quite silly. And especially because, I didn't want my first game with my own company to be like this super serious, dramatic personal work, especially if people ended up rejecting it and disliking it, because that can hurt a lot more than if people don't laugh at a joke, if that makes sense. If you're writing a funny game and people don't laugh at a joke, it's fine. There's another joke around the corner that they might laugh at, and you can keep writing jokes. And that makes it a little less anxiety-inducing when people are experiencing something you're writing or a piece of storytelling. I've always found it a little easier to write comedy rather than straight-up drama or thrillers or whatever. So it just felt a little more natural for me. It's something I felt a little more comfortable with when it came to making my own first game. Because if I was writing something super serious and dramatic, I never would have finished it. The insecurity would have taken over me and I would have canceled it.
Yeah, absolutely. I could totally understand. I think it would be really hard to be... I think for me it would be very hard to be serious. I love sci-fi. It's one of my favorite genres. It always will be. And I have these ideas in my head for these stories that they seem really cool and really fun, but then I start to sit down and write them and it makes me cringe. I have a really difficult time sitting down and actually fleshing out these characters, and in my head I'm like, wow, that guy's super badass or whatever it is. But then I get into the weeds of trying to actually bring life into this character, and it's very difficult to do for me because I have a very difficult time removing my self-aware brain, I guess, from what I'm trying to express through the character. And so I can definitely empathize. I think that's a great way to solve that problem, is well, I don't want to deal with these really intensely serious conversations, which are I think very hard to write. And that's one thing that you mentioned, The Last of Us. They really nailed the writing in that. It's just incredible. I think about trying to sit down and write that story, and they crushed it. I don't think I could personally be as serious as that tone requires. So I like that that's very much like, this is who I am as a writer, this is what I want to embrace, and so this is what I'm going to bring to, you know, to the story and to the game. And I love that too about games, that it, not just playing a game, but the creation of it can be this this creative, self-reflective kind of endeavor that it's almost like a little piece of, you know, your mind that you get to share with a lot of people, which is pretty exciting and probably humbling a little bit too. I think for me, like, that would be my experience of like, oh wow, you're seeing a lot of my thought process right now.
Yes. Yeah, it is like at times when you write a line of dialogue and you're like, that could be something I would say to my therapist. Should I delete that immediately? Am I sharing way too much here?
We divulged a little too much information. That's awesome. I'm just trying to think of like, I think I would to myself almost be like, we're being a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? Vulnerable with we're being a little vulnerable with our writing today. Oh Lord, I can imagine. Like, I think embracing brevity has its strong suits for sure. And I do think it is probably something that has been maybe, I don't know that it's been necessarily challenging to write that, but I don't know that players have necessarily wanted it up until the last few years. Like, there's always been a little bit of slapstick. But like, for example, Mario Kart, I don't know why, is like the first like slapstick thing that comes to mind. But what's the narrative and what's the narrative? You know what I mean? It's kind of like
absolutely nothing.
It's just a bunch of characters slapping each other and with shells. There's like
slipping over bananas.
It doesn't need to like have much of a story, but I like that we're at the point that now we can kind of mesh the two things of like the slapstick kind of humor sort of thing, but there's also this narrative element that's layering over the top. So man, I'm looking forward to some giggles if I get beyond the first fight. I hope.
Fingers crossed.
I'll try. I'm gonna do my best. Get all my hacks together.
Actually, in the first battle, you can't die, so you'll be all right. You'll be okay.
I'll get through at least one. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Have you run into any problems, you know, kind of blending this very sort of nostalgic sort of style of game design, which I'm really loving that we're in this era of nostalgia. I think we all need a little bit of that. Have there been any struggles with trying to combine sort of this nostalgic game design with this more sort of modern era Unreal Engine kind of very different sort of game development style?
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically, like, if you look at a game from 30 years ago compared to a game from now, the amount of information they give the player, like the amount of hand-holding, I guess might be the right word, is so much more prevalent than it is now. Because if you play, like, a game from the early 90s, the game doesn't tell you anything. It's like, okay, this is the world you inhabit. Here's a weapon. Go. You know, it just sets you loose, you know? And you have to figure out so much of what you need to do in that world. Whereas today, you end up with tutorials that in some games are hours long. You could end up being on the 10th mission and the game is still trying to teach you things that it didn't teach you before. So trying to figure out where the right line is in terms of what should I tell the player and what should I let them figure out for themselves has been super difficult. And especially like the earlier version of the demo didn't have health bars for the enemies. It only had a health bar for the playable characters. And I got a lot of feedback being like, there's no health bar for the enemies. I don't know how close I am to defeating them. And I was like, fine, okay, I hear you. I will fix that. And like, you know, Zelda games, for example, which is, and I've said it before, Zelda is the main influence for questing. Zelda games don't have health bars outside of the boss battles. You encounter a normal enemy, you slash it a few times with your sword, it dies, hopefully. And I want to take a similar approach with questing until people are like, I'm learning people really like to know what progress they're making. They need a visualization of the progress they're making during a battle. So that was an interesting learning experience in terms of how much information to give the player so that they feel rewarded, so that they feel like they can measure their progression as they get better. And I think that's a very, I guess, From Software, Dark Souls, Elden Ring thing, where it's like the first time you fight a boss, you'll take a third of its health, and then you try to like gradually improve upon that. So yeah, I think From Software has really messed that up for people who want to keep information to themselves regarding the health of enemies.
That's a very interesting point. I hadn't thought about it, but I think you're right. So my brother's a lot older than me, and he had an excuse me, he had a NES, and I remember playing all of these, every Zelda game I could get my hands on, and a lot of the games from that time, like even the weird ones like Qbert. What was that? That's like the weirdest game I think I probably ever played. But I still don't think I understand Qbert. I'm just suddenly realizing. But like I remember in that game too, there's such little information on the interactions that you have. And as a kid, because that was the only thing that was out at the time, I didn't think it was unusual. But now reflecting on that, I do think that I would feel a bit odd if I wasn't sure, because even like, mining games, for example, they now show you sort of health bars with the exception of, very few. And so I don't think that that's something that would have occurred to me. It's something that I think has become so prevalent that maybe that's just something we've come to expect as a culture, which is a really interesting concept to start considering, like what mechanics, what functions within the game, what kind of UX design features have we come to expect.
Yeah, and I wonder if it feels like a very social media influence thing where when we interact something, we need immediate feedback or an immediate response, something visual, whether it's like a health bar moving or something flashing to know you've done damage to it, compared to 30 years ago where you just start attacking and you hope for the best until the enemy stops trying to hit you back.
You just hit your little button as fast as you could. Yeah, I remember sitting in my living room being like trying to smash anything that was headed my direction. Yeah, that's true. That's a really interesting point. I wonder if there's somebody studying this. That would be really cool to read. I hope so. That would be awesome. But it's cool to see that you've had this interaction with people playing the game that has been able to sort of bring these two sorts of worlds together, right? This very nostalgic thing with this very modern era of gaming. What do these look like? And I think, it's going to be cool to see how that becomes defined in the end. And yeah, a nostalgic game built for a modern player. It's going to be a very cool thing to experience for sure. If somebody watching this, a lot of people who are interested in these topics, as you can imagine, are fellow indie devs, people who are interested in, making a game. If there's somebody out there who is maybe in your position or wants to be in a position that you are, what would you recommend for them for getting started or crafting a title on their own?
We have another hour to talk about that. I'll try to narrow it down to like the 2 or 3 best pieces of advice I could give. Honestly, in this industry, persistence and patience are everything. And that's if you're making your own game or if you're just trying to get a job in the games industry. You will need to have so much determination to keep soldiering on in the face of constant obstacles and rejection and failure. And also something that people don't like to hear is that luck is going to play a huge part in whether or not you succeed, because the games industry is so subjective. Like, we're making art, we're making entertainment. You're gonna end up finding a bunch of people who don't like what you've made purely because of tastes or whatever element of luck you want to include. But you just have to find that one person who gets it, that one person who knows what your vision is, what you're trying to make, whether that's a publisher if you're making your own game or a team lead if you're trying to get a job. And some people hate the idea that luck plays a part in our careers or our lives, but I honestly take it as like a optimistic thing. It's like, if you keep going, if you persist, eventually you'll find someone who gets what you're doing and will believe in you and will back you. So persistence, patience, and just an acknowledgement that luck is involved and you should be okay, hopefully.
That's great. No, I love that a lot because I think I've never worked in the games industry in terms of like for a development thing. My day job is PR and marketing, which is its own kind of it's really fun, but it's also a hellscape. Like I'm not gonna lie. There are parts of it that are incredibly frustrating, and I from somebody who sort of proxy works in that realm, it's a very competitive space, both I think for employees as well as game creators. There's just a lot. Like we were talking about kind of the ability for people to make games. Pretty much anybody can make a game. So a lot of people like games, so there's a lot of games. Right? And I think the count for 2024 was over 18,000 titles releasing on Steam. That's wild. That's a lot of games. And so I think even cutting through the noise and trying to find that audience can feel overwhelming. But I definitely think that you're right. Like from a marketing perspective too, that if you continue to share pieces from your game and really focus on like the best foot forward, that's what I've really noticed people respond to. I think sometimes I see game developers understandably being a bit hesitant to show off like the best features of the game. But I do think for players, if there's one or two things that you can kind of pull out that you can really highlight and showcase, that is really helpful for players because that's what they want to see. They want to see what's the cool thing that I can do in this game that I can't do anywhere else. Like that's why I want to come to this title. And so definitely I think persistence is key. Algorithms are brutal, man. They will, like you said, genuinely. People will try to say, "Oh, you just have to market with the best strategy." That's part of it, but part of it, like you said, even algorithmically, is luck. Like, is TikTok going to randomly pick up one of your videos that is no different than any of the other videos to show to a million people? That happens sometimes, and there's genuinely no way to predict it. And so I think both from a marketing standpoint and, like you said, from development, creating the actual story itself, persistence is key. I've seen people, like I've got some friends on LinkedIn that I've watched try to break into the games industry forever and just recently have, finally landed their first role. And I was like, hell yeah, like it took years, but you did it, man. Like you didn't give up. And I love that. I think that's very encouraging too for devs because you've got a huge workload, especially for solo devs like you, and a lot of the people that are dreaming about making games, that is a huge burden to bear. There's a lot of moving parts. Yeah. So yeah, persistent. I love that a lot. Persistence. I hadn't thought about it that way before, I think.
I mean, there's also like indie games, or I guess to an extent, games in general, is one of the few spaces where word of mouth still has a lot of power. If you look at something like Balatro, which is the most simple, straightforward game imaginable, and it thrived so much out of word of mouth. And that gives me so much about optimism because that doesn't exist as much in movies or music. So for indies, like if you genuinely learn your craft and you put in the effort and you put in the passion, you can be better than a solid 75% of the games that I put on Steam that I just cobbled together in the space of a few weeks. And if enough people realize that and see the passion and effort you've put in, the word of mouth will spread. And you may not sell 5 million copies, but you can make a career out of making your own games if you really give it down, basically.
Oh, I love that. That's such an inspiring place to be because I think it feels overwhelming for people a lot. That's kind of the vibe that I get from what I see online is it's an industry that is pretty brutal. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like it's a pretty brutalistic industry. But I do think one of the silver linings of being in the era that we're in, again, with all this technology, we've come back to that again. Like you said, you can build a career with your own titles. It's definitely possible to do. I think a great example of this is, I forgot his name, Tyler, I think, who made the Schedule 1 game.
Oh, yeah.
It's a guy. It's just a guy sitting in his room somewhere, I have no idea where he lives. I don't know what his story is. I have no idea.
Yeah, and the games industry is filled with that. Toby Fox made Undertale, 95% of it by himself. The guy who made Five Nights at Freddy's did most of it by himself. Like, it's not impossible if you genuinely care about what you're making and you have a good idea and you see it through to the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that. Yeah. And I think that's a really, I think that's something the industry needs to hear and people in the industry need to hear right now because it's, it is a brutal time period. It is a brutal industry, but there's so much opportunity that's out there to carve your own space and tell your own story. And I'm excited to see how questing, fits into that. And I will definitely be downloading the demo when it comes out.
Thank you.
Oh yeah. Awesome. Well, where can people find you if they want to learn more about questing or Jaggy Snake? Where can people find you online?
In terms of the most regular updates, we're on Blue Sky. If you search for Jaggy Snake Games on Blue Sky, you'll find our account where we post a few times a week, give or take. But also, questing is on Steam. If you want to follow wishlist to see when the demo comes out, or eventually when the full game comes out, go look us up on Steam.
Awesome. Yes, you heard the man. Go download it and go wishlist it, which I will do right after our chat. And again, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear about the process behind your game, and I hope I can beat one or more battles.
I hope so too. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I appreciate it.